Hey everyone, how's it going? This is Zach and I am here with a ranking video for you guys. Now for this ranking, I am going to be ranking the James Bond actors. Now James Bond, I really like the character. I've always been a fan of the character. And when it comes to all the actors who play James Bond, I think all of us can be in agreement that there's never really been a bad James Bond actor. And it's been said before that you really do have to be a good actor to play James Bond, and that is absolutely true. So I am going to rank the 007 James Bond actors from my least favorite to favorite. And of course, let me know in the comments, how would you rank the James Bond actors? So we'll be going from Sean Connery, George Lazenby, Roger Moore, Timothy Dalton, Pierce Brosnan, and Daniel Craig. All of these James Bond actors, basically the main James Bond actors. All right, so let's go ahead and get into who I have last in my ranking as the worst James Bond actor. But even though I say worst, that's not really saying a whole lot because, again, I like all of the James Bond actors. I think they're all very good. But last in my ranking, I got to go with George Lazenby. Now, surprisingly, I've seen a few people say that he's actually their favorite James Bond actor. But for me, he's got to be last. And the only reason he's last is really just because he's only had one James Bond movie on Her Majesty's Secret Service. And I do like that film. I think it's a solid James Bond movie. But again, the reason that George Lazenby is last in this ranking is because he's only had one movie. But I do think on Her Majesty's Secret Service, his performance in that film was good. So definitely a good James Bond actor, but again, since he's only done one movie, he's got to be last. I think maybe if he's done more movies, he might have been higher in this ranking, but because he's only done one film, he's got to be last. Okay, so next we've got Daniel Craig. This was the James Bond actor that I pretty much grew up on. This was the one that I was always the most familiar with. This was, when I got into James Bond, whenever Daniel Craig was Bond. And yeah, I do think he does a good job as Bond. I mean, he definitely has some charisma, and I think he does the role very well. He's, of course, had 5 James Bond movies. 2 of them, I think, are very solid, and the other ones are kind of just eh. Of course, you had Casino Royale, which I do think is really good. Quantum of Solace, which kind of meh. I think the editing is honestly the biggest issue with that film. Skyfall, which honestly might be the best of the Daniel Craig James Bond films. And then you had Spectre, which is kind of eh. And then No Time to Die, which was also eh. So, yeah, but unfortunately, he has had more meh movies than actually solid James Bond movies. So that's why Daniel Craig has to be here in my ranking. So Daniel Craig, I do like him as Bond, but just not the best. So next we've got Timothy Dalton. Now, Timothy Dalton is a really good Bond actor, and he's only done 2 James Bond movies, but I think both of them are really good. The Living Daylights and License to Kill. Now, License to Kill is actually one of my favorite James Bond films. Definitely a top 3 James Bond movie, I would say. But yeah, Timothy Dalton, like with George Lazenby, I mean, I guess the reason why he's not my favorite of the Bond actors, or even in my top 3, is because he's only had 2 movies. Like, I feel like maybe if he had more, like, he might be higher, but yeah, but I think the films that he did are actually really good. I mean, I would consider both of them classics, both really good James Bond movies. So Timothy Dalton, really good Bond actor. Really don't have any complaints about him, but I just like the top 3 more. That's all. But Timothy Dalton is, of course, great. And again, License to Kill, I think, is one of the best Bond movies. So here we are at the top 3. Number 3 is Pierce Brosnan. Now, there was actually a time where Pierce Brosnan was my number 1 favorite James Bond actor, but the top 2 I've just grown to like more. And I think the top 2 are just more iconic and more legendary. But of course, you probably already know who the top two are at this point. But Pierce Brosnan, I still think, is very good. He's a very good Bond actor. This is another guy that has a lot of charisma and just does very good at what he does. And GoldenEye, I think, is honestly one of the best James Bond movies. Of course, he did that film. He did Tomorrow Never Dies, The World Is Not Enough, and then, unfortunately, what I would consider the worst James Bond movie, Die Another Day. Now, I know that a lot of fans pretend that that film doesn't exist, and honestly, you could pretend that that film doesn't exist and just say that Pierce Brosnan has only had 3 Bond films, but yeah, so Die Another Day just was not a good movie, but yeah. But The World Is Not Enough, I mean, that film I think is okay. It's definitely not as good as GoldenEye and Tomorrow Never Dies, but that is one thing that you will notice with Pierce Brosnan. And I think that's the reason why, or at least one of the reasons why, he's kind of been bumped down in my ranking, opposed to number 1, instead number 3, is because one thing you will notice about Pierce Brosnan is that with each James Bond movie, it's always a step down from the last. That's one of the things you will notice about Pierce Brosnan's James Bond films. But GoldenEye, I think, is a classic. It's a great James Bond movie and one of the best, I would say. And not just a great James Bond movie, but I think just in general, a great action movie that's definitely worth a watch, especially if you have never seen the film or if you haven't seen it in a while. Definitely watch GoldenEye. Great movie, but Pierce Brosnan has to be number 3. I do like him a lot. All right, so number 2, we've got Roger Moore. Roger Moore, I mean, it's funny because Roger Moore used to be a lot lower in my ranking, but I really like Roger Moore now as James Bond. He's definitely one of the best, and I know a lot of fans would actually put Roger Moore at number 1, which I do understand why. He's a very good Bond actor, but for me, there's just one other actor that I prefer as Bond over Roger Moore, but Roger Moore does fantastic. Of course, one of my favorites of his would have to be The Spy Who Loved Me. That's such a great movie, and I know that some people don't like A View to a Kill, which was the last Bond movie he did. I think that film is okay. Now, yes, I do understand people's complaints with that movie because of Roger Moore's age. Like, you can tell he's getting older and, you know, he's just not fitting the role of James Bond anymore with that film. But I think A View to a Kill is okay. I think it's an okay James Bond movie. It's not all bad. And I actually do like the song A View to a Kill, the song that's in that movie. So there you go. And then I know a lot of people don't like Moonraker, which I do like Moonraker. I know it's one of the more divisive James Bond films because that's where they went to space and everything, but I do like Moonraker. I think that film's a bit underrated, but Roger Moore I do like as Bond. I do think he is a very good actor, a very good James Bond actor. So Roger Moore is at number 2, but at number 1, Sean Connery. Of course, the original James Bond actor, and honestly, I don't think anyone will ever be able to top Sean Connery as James Bond. I think most of the James Bond films that he did were very solid. Of course, you have From Russia with Love, and you have Goldfinger, which Goldfinger I think is one of the best Bond films. Thunderball is also great. And then you have You Only Live Twice, which I also think is a solid Bond film. Now, Dr. No, I know that this is the first James Bond movie. I think this film is just okay, but you could tell that with this film, it doesn't have as much action as the ones that would come after it. But I still think Dr. No, for what it is a decent film, but there's just other ones from the Sean Connery era that I prefer. But when it comes to Sean Connery's Bond films, I think most, if not maybe all of his movies are good when we're talking about his James Bond movies, of course. So Sean Connery, he has to be number 1, has to be number 1 in my ranking for the James Bond actors. He's the most iconic. Of course, he is the original James Bond actor, and he's brilliant. absolutely brilliant. So he's coming in at number 1. So that is my ranking for the Bond actors. Let me know what you think. So with that said, thanks for watching and have a good one.